John, recently you had the opportunity to manage as an R&D manager some big legacy software systems, and you took some interesting decisions regarding the modernization of some parts of it using some low-code platforms. Can you describe what was the thought process behind it, why you chose a low-code platform as opposed to maybe a traditional kind of fancy hype architecture?
Yeah, sure. So already, let's say, in the beginning of my career, I got experience with, let's say, what they currently name as low-code platforms, but they were called fourth-generation languages, to enable software developers to create software more easily, have a lower threshold to get more developers on the platform, etc. And yeah, I noticed some interesting experiences throughout my career, which made me think, okay, when I want to start with a new platform, have everything set, I want to apply these experiences and lessons learned in order to make use of it and see how we can do things better.
So basically, the productivity of the fourth generation language was still a major factor. Maybe the architecture was not there or the maintainability of the product, but still the achievement in terms of productivity was still important for you.
Yes, at that time when we developed let's say applications using fourth generation languages, the productivity difference was of course visible. It was much faster than the traditional 3GL like C++ or C at that time, or even Pascal. But you didn't have, of course, the cloud to deploy. It was all local. But the speed is, of course, good. What we saw that companies are able to have a shorter time to market and therefore acquire business much more rapidly. But there's one major factor which was often not taken into account, and that's the maintainability on longer term, because you can achieve these goals on shorter notice, make more businesses, but you know, if you create an application or platform or a set of applications, then you have to keep it maintainable and able to adapt to changes in technology. You know, mobile came, internet came, all these kinds of things, and in order not to completely rewrite or get even stuck in the end on the maintainability, you need to pay proper attention. And also in that time, you see kind of like the same things as currently. There's a shortage on developers. So the other benefit was then if you lower the threshold, it's easier to adapt to these kind of languages. You can also attract other kind of developers. Sometimes they're now called citizen developers, or they have other kind of terminology for that. In fact, we were able to get developers who had a university background in agriculture, and they were converted to developers. But if you do that, of course, you have to make sure that your architecture is also in place and that you check it properly, and that by that the maintainability is ensured also on longer term. And yeah, of course, the business demand, the functionality is always, let's say, the main factor. It's dominant in the whole process. And these technologies also didn't force you to use proper architecture. And then, if that's not in place, then longer term, you lose your investment and the costs become too high, and also you don't benefit the full potential of either the low-code or fourth-generation language.
When presenting with the modernization challenge, did you start it with the tool set, or did you start with the architecture of the phases through which you want the system to go through to reach a certain, let's say, better place for your IT infrastructure?
Yeah, we wanted a platform which is closer to the user, which is much more visible, things in terms of processes instead of code. That's why we looked at low-code platforms, and we quickly became interested in the OutSystems platform, especially as there were good reports from Gartner and Forrester, which caught our attention. So instead of making a whole requirements list at the start, we just say, okay, what do they offer, these platforms? And from that we started our thought process. So thought of the lessons learned, and then if we talk about in terms of maintainability, what should we put in place to make sure when we get in these technologies and use them, what can we make sure we protect our investment also on the longer term?
So how did you approach trying to answer these questions? Did you hire consultants from OutSystems and making sure you have the right architecture from the beginning, or how did you approach that?
Yes, we hired a consultant ourselves to give advice on it, somebody who's experienced in that area. But also we asked those questions to OutSystems. So how do you make sure? And it quickly became clear that they also educate their users of the platform, because it's in their interest. If a lot of companies develop applications fast but get stuck after a couple of years because of maintainability problems, it's also affecting them. So they see it as one of the pillars, in fact, and they have an architectural vision, which is called the 4-layer canvas, which they actively promote, and they even have some tooling to check if you correctly apply it. So that's one of the factors. Looking at maintainability, I see it as a combination of 3 things. It is both the product, which need to support it, your processes, and the people. So this combination you need to look at. And that's also what we did. So we looked what is in place to make sure we have all these components adequately addressed.
Right, because many times one of the challenges is that not only IT's legacy, but also people and the processes are kind of stuck in the same age.
Yeah.
So you also have the added challenge of trying to introduce newer methodologies like Scrum, Agile, and so on. So that's kind of an added complexity on it. So
Yes.
how did you approach that?
If we look at from the product perspective, we checked what are they offering. So for us it was important to being able to deploy in cloud. We didn't want the complexity of on-premise, and as a bank that has an additional complexity or challenge that you have to convince your regulator and other authorities that it's safe and secure. Having that in place, from a product perspective, they actually have a sort of managed services on it. So one of the things with maintainability, of course, is you have to keep regular release updates. Right. So one of the things is you have to have a policy of that. And so we checked what are they doing with that, and they, as it is also a managed proposition, they in fact do it for you even. So once there's a new release, let's say in the 3rd quarter, then we make sure in the latest 2nd quarter of the next year we are upgraded to their latest platform. And we set some dates for the different environments. So we go from dev, test, acceptance to production, and they handle the upgrade for you. Of course we need to verify, but all of these things are managed, so that makes it much easier, and we can focus on our core, and that is developing the functionality. So that's one of the product or proposition aspects which were taken into account.
We discussed about low code, but actually the benefit of a low code environment is productivity. Did you make a comparison, for instance, in the productivity increase between, for instance, your platform and maybe a typical C# .NET platform or Java?
We did not do it ourselves at the beginning, but we asked some parties. So when we select, let's say, our development partners, we asked about what they think about the technology and how they look into it. So a few of those parties or vendors also responded to that, and they came up with, of course, a significant productivity increase. What you actually have seen, one is the speed, but we see even more productivity increase because of the quality. Yeah. We let's say, because it's a platform that checks consistency, so that's also a product aspect, you get zero or very little technical issues or technical defects. And that's also maintainability and also productivity. So the whole platform makes sure that the number of defects we get out of a sprint is very low. It's really low.
I was amazed, like the number
Yeah.
of issues after a sprint to be something like 1 or 2.
Yeah, and
It's
then not
like-
for one sprint, but for a lot of sprints.
Actually,
It's
for
quite consistent.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's one of the main factors. And okay, that's not maybe. It also affects maintainability on longer term, but you also see that productivity increase. Later on, we also asked Yonder to check within their development teams how they look to the productivity increase. So at least 3 to 5 times faster is achievable. And if you look at quality, it may be even some higher. So it gives a lot of confidence also to our users.
Of course, there is no such thing as free lunch. So I think part of the trade-off is that you are paying for managed objects and per interaction.
Yes.
Is there any kind of recommendation regarding the business model that you have that would put you in the sweet spot for the low-code platforms, or it should be generally applicable to any kind of business challenge and so on?
No, I think you need to do significant amount of development, because in the end it saves you development capacity and also gives back quality. So that you have to take into account in the business case of using these kinds of platform. But it's also ease. If you see how we do deployments, it's really one push of a button, and we make sure all data, let's say, migrations and conversions are also handled, and our application managers at the bank, they can really do it themselves, and it's really a job that requires little to no effort, and it's very transparent. So it's not only the development, it's also the deployment which pays off.
So basically the costs of the runtime basically are being covered by the increase of the productivity in development as well as the increase of the quality of the result.
Yes, and that means that if you only do a very little development or a small scope for a short period, then I think you should reconsider. But if you have a longer term vision, we have in fact a whole digitalization roadmap. And for that we are multiple years digitalizing the bank, implementing workflows, business rules to support and, let's say, even at our end decrease the manual actions and activities and make them auditable, visible. That really pays off.
I also have a little bit of background in 4GL languages, and now looking in retrospective, we've seen that some of the platforms really managed to survive well, in the sense that they are still supported, they still have a good lifeline, let's say, but maybe other platforms, because there was a boom of 4GL languages and platform in 70s and 80s, some of the platform become a niche product, which pretty much no development. Looking on a longer roadmap, aren't you afraid that maybe at some point in 10 or 20 years, these low-code platforms would become a small niche without future that would just milk the customers, and your product would be locked in?
Yeah, I think with any technology you have a lock-in. So even with .NET, or even if you have a Java stack, you choose certain components which in the end create a basis which is cost effort to move to something else. Looking at the low-code platform, yes, that's of course always a risk. But therefore it's also important to have an exit plan. And in fact our regulators, auditors demand from us that we have an exit plan, and it's also thoroughly tested. So actually we already checked the code if we detach it. So you can detach the code and you go from, for instance, for OutSystems to .NET code. We took that as part of our the procurement process of OutSystems. But that was without recompiling and checking if the application really works. And we're now going to perform this year. And OutSystems fully supports it because they want to onboard customers. We also want to make sure that if for some reason they want to offboard, that they fully support it and they don't want to be seen as a lock-in. But any technology you use, you build up a code base and you build up legacy, of course. So it's always a challenge if you're going to move to something else.
How important was this exit strategy when choosing for your specific platform? Because it's not very, let's say, often that you have 4GL or low-core platforms that also provides this.
Yeah.
I think it's quite unique.
Yeah, it was mandatory to have it. So in fact, if you detach, you have, in the past you also have the Java code, but now they mainly support .NET. So then you have, you get the .NET code and you can compile it and make it work even in Amazon in their own environment, but for, let's say not on the managed services environment, but on your own environment, and then make it work. And we are going to see that results pretty soon.
So basically the risk of being locked in long term, it's basically zero with this case.
Yeah, you could say that. Being locked, yeah, because the possibility is there, but it will never be, of course, an easy job. And but yeah, if we by doing this, then of course, like a business continuity plan, it will make sure you have the right procedures in place to do it, and that feels, of course, much more comfortable.
And I know that you actually didn't just build some web products, but you also built some mobile products. Mm-hmm. Was the productivity and feature support just as good on the mobile side as it was on the regular side?
Yeah, so far we have developed, let's say, a little functionality on the mobile app, because the web app has more priority. But the feedback we got from the development we did was very good, and we also see the productivity increase because with one, let's say, set of code, you can both deploy to Android and iOS and have a native app even. So, yeah, that you can obviously see what is the productivity increase instead of having two teams or whatever, or development on two platforms. So, yeah.
Okay. I also know that basically some of the parts from the agile process were also moved outside of the IT parts. So some of the areas of the banks started following some of the agile practices, mm-hmm. like the stand-ups and so on. How did that happen?
Yes, there are some, let's say in Agile there are of course a lot of best practices which count for every project. Whether it's an IT project or a business project or a combination of those. Because you want to show results frequently, you want to make your changes as soon as they come and be flexible in that. And of course you want to show the results often. And have the communication well established. So yeah, we introduced that also in the, let's say, other projects. Of course, in the IT, the people can more easily adapt, so it takes more time and more coaching, etc. But yeah, we want to use those best practices in those projects.
If it would be to give an advice for an R&D manager that's looking to modernize their current legacy product, what would you advise them regarding the low code?
Mm-hmm. Of course, you have to think of your requirements, both functional and non-functional, the things we discussed about what should be in the product, the exit strategy that should be there, but also look at the whole software development lifecycle. So we talked about the product, but it's also about the process. And the process in development starts when, of course, you define your user stories, etc. Also, you have to define your architecture, your data model, etc. And also apply, think of this four-layer canvas and apply it, and also check it afterwards when you have implemented the functionality. During, let's say, the development, of course, you also need to make sure that best practices also, which are with the, let's say, the traditional three generation languages, and that you do your peer reviews, that you have your standards. So define your technical software quality standards, and that's important, because whether it's a low code or another kind of platform, you need to ensure that on longer term it's maintainable. Then there's another aspect which we also implemented and which I can also recommend, and that is have an independent party look at the software quality. So we do business with a company who actually get our code and automatically run some processes to do static code analysis. And they come up with recommendations. So, and then in the sprints you apply those, so you can monitor also the technical software quality from that point. And as a bank, it's important to show that independent, like auditors, etc. They can always come and see, okay, how are you managing it? How do you check the quality of your code? So that's a full, let's say, front to end and the software development life cycle.
You mentioned kind of technical depth, at least twice. Once, making sure that you're always up to date to your platform. So planning up ahead of the time and making sure you're actually never end up in the situation in which you're no longer up to date with your platform. But also you mentioned making sure that your maintainability is up to your requirements. So how do you plan for, let's say, fixing technical debt in your current sprints? Is there a specific percentage of time that you invest in making sure that is there? Because many times it's very difficult to prioritize between functional investment in functionality and investments in fixing technical debt. And of course, technical debt can never be perfect. It's just like security. It's an aspirational thing. So how do you make sure that you're constantly making sure that technical debt still keeps under control?
Yes. Yeah, that's indeed interesting, and we apply from the SAFe, the Agile Scaling methodology, the PI planning, a program increment. So because we have multiple streams of development and different applications, we also have a dependency. So what we did, as the teams were, let's say, sprinting from one sprint to another sprint, delivering functionality, they also at some point became a bit exhausted with that. So what we introduced is a SIP sprint, a Stabilization, Innovation and Planning sprint of 2 weeks. We have them after 6 sprints, so let's say around 3 months. And the first week is for the team to fix also some technical debt, which they prioritize themselves, and prepare for the next week, which is the PI planning, program increment planning. So that's the next 6 sprints. And within that next 6 sprints, we have of course the functionality that we implement in the different streams, but we have also a separate stream, and that's the architectural highway, we call it. And it's also referred at as our framework, because in that we have, let's say, technical items like security or other technical issues that affect every application. So defining this architectural highway as part of the framework, we assigned specific, let's say, resource capacity to it. And that is consistent throughout the PI. And on top of that, we have then this Stabilization, Innovation and Planning sprint after 6 sprints, which the team has a bit more freedom to manage themselves, so it's not based on functional priority. So in that case, we continue to work on, let's say, the maintainability and the security of our product.
Right. Is that the same applicable also for innovation? Do you make any difference between functional and technical innovation, for instance? I know that functional innovation is important for the actual business part of the thing, but many times developers only think in terms of technical innovation. So as an R&D manager, how do you see the relationship between these two?
Yeah, the functional innovation of course comes a lot from the business. The technical innovation we do during this SIP planning. So For instance, today we have the hackathon together with Yonder. The whole team is here, and yeah, we explore let's say the technical challenges and which are possible, so that we can bring them back to the organization and show them what is possible. And we have good experiences from the previous hackathons also. So in this SIP sprint, we also plan this the hackathon.
So the subjects are always items that provide solutions to maybe pain points or solutions to optimizations, because basically you can, in these days, if you look at the technology innovations, you can go in so many ways, in so many directions. How do you prioritize from the technical innovation the ones that would really have an impact in your business?
Yeah, we look at some things that are really enablers for the functionality. So if they are successful, they can really enable functionality in the coming period. But also sometimes from another perspective. For instance, we have in our current hackathon about what do you need to do with a user manual? How do you approach it currently? We always used to have it online or maybe printed or whatever, but that's not from this time anymore. And yeah, our applications are quite self-explanatory. But in this hackathon we try to see what are the new trends, what are the new things we can do with explaining how the process in the application or the application works. So that is, that's a different kind of innovation, of course. The third, the third pillar of the, let's say, lifecycle extension and lifecycle management is the people. So with the platform that we use, the OutSystems platform, we also make sure they're trained, they're well educated, they can go to conferences to share their knowledge with peers, technical knowledge. And of course, the hackathon also makes it possible to innovate and see what can be done with the OutSystems platform, or sometimes with an extension built in, for instance, .NET, to make those things happen. So it's really the triangle: product, process, and people, which should be integrated part of your life cycle extension.
It's what the users expect. They expect that they are able to do their processes faster in a more easier way. So they don't really care that it's low code or it's Java or it's something, as long as it's enabling them to do something. So that's functional innovation. And that's why I made the distinction, because when you're talking about innovation, most of the time developers only think about technical innovation. But actually end users, they do not care about a technical innovation. They do not care about the technology inside. They only care about what it enables them to do.
Yes, it's about enablers.
Yeah. So from this perspective, sometimes that looks like a functional innovation might not have anything to do with a technical innovation. It might be. They usually go hand in hand, because technical innovation might provide some new ways to do some different functional innovations, but they are not necessarily related. And usually I put the difference between the two, because many times I think it's a kind of a big split between what the technical people think and what the users require from this perspective. So the fact that you can do functional innovation without necessarily going to the latest framework or the newest hype, or having to put in there the newest, I don't know what kind of NoSQL database or libraries out there. And from this perspective, I think it might make sense, the fact that low code, it allows you to focus on the functionality as much as possible, as little on the technology side.
Because the platform also evolves, and they make sure they also incorporate new technical innovations. For instance, native app development. Normally you have to have a separate team with separate technology on that and build separate expertise. But now they came up with the platform, so native app development, it's in the platform with one set of code for both Android and iOS. So that's their innovation they put in, which enables you to do your functional innovation.
Right. So basically, I think one of the keys of the low-code platform is that actually allows you to capitalize on the technical innovation that was done by somebody else, and use that to actually focus on your functional innovation, which is the only one that actually matters to your users.
Yes.
So basically, low-code platforms allows you to capitalize on the technical innovation that was performed by others, so you can focus on the functional innovation, the one that actually matters to the end users. But you also mentioned that actually you're trying to stretch the boundaries, because basically a low-code platform doesn't necessarily prohibit to add extensions and innovations in that through plugins and so on. And I think this is one of the things that you're doing at this hackathon, trying to add some machine learning and
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much for the information, John. Have fun in the hackathon, and hopefully we can have you for many, many new hackathons here.